Now let's talk about a list over here. All right, let's talk about a list over here. Um, Talking about a list, maybe a list is the most used data type that you can actually find in Python. We're going to be using this over and over and over again. So take note of how you're going to create this list. And I like using an example because if I want to show you this theoretically, it's quite not going to make sense, right? If I show you with example, you actually get to understand, just like we're doing here. You actually get to understand what we are doing instead of me telling you in a theoretical format. All right, so let me show you how you're going to create a list, right, in Python. In Python, this is just a comment as I showed you earlier on, right? So you see that I'm providing some comment in here so that you can actually know what is going on over here. Now, I'm creating this variable int underscore list, right? So int list, as I said, if you're creating the variable, make the variable name make sense to what you're going to do. So over here, if you want to create a list, right, what you need to take note of is that if you want to create a list, let me open this and then do this. Okay, let me go here and then do it like that so that you can actually see. Okay, now if you want to create a list, right, what you need to actually take into consideration, right, let me use something like that. What you need to take into consideration is this square bracket that you can find over here, right? So we use the square bracket to actually create a list in Python, right? So whatever I have here, this is an integer, right? It's all of them are integer, right? So this is an integer list that I've created over here. If you see this one, I have a string, right? I have a string. You see that I have here, I'm using single quote instead of double quote as we were using earlier on. So I have one string here, I have another string here, I have another string here. So this is a list, but it's a string list, right? So you see that I'm using the square bracket in here. Okay. And then I can also put everything together. It's not necessary you need to create an integer list or a string list. You can create anything, integer, float, everything. You can put them together. Right, so over here you can see that I have my square brackets over there. This one is a string, this is an integer, this is a string, this is a float, this is a string. You see that I'm adding everything. So you can create a string which contains all of them, right? And then you can see the variable name that I'm giving over here, right? Int and string list. Right, so now if I see this one anywhere, I know what it contains in there, right? And now what I'm doing is that I'm printing in order for me to print everything, right? If I do just one print, it's just going to print the last one, but I want to print everything. So you can see over here, I'm printing the int list, right? Which is this one that I have here. So if I do that, this is what I have. You see that I have my list over here, which is 530,025, and then this is the same thing that we have here. Now string list, right? I'm printing the string list is too here. You can see that is there. Right, hello everyone, this is a string list. You see that is there. If you see the int and string, right, I'm printing it over here too, and you can see it over there. Okay, so this is basically how you create a string. Use a square bracket and then input whatever you want to add into your string, into your list, right? Just add whatever you want to add into your list in there, right? You can mix them as you want. All right, so basically that is how you want to create a list. And if you want to check the type of what you've created to be sure that what you created is actually a list, you can use type. So if I use type on int list, for instance, remember I created int list here, right? So I'm checking the type of that, right? And I'm using the print function to print it out, right? Because I want to print everything here, that's why I'm using the print function. Also, I can just use type. I can just use type and then int list to output whatever I want to do with. So if I check the type of int list, you can see that I have a list. The type of it is a list. The type of a list that I created is also a list. The last one, which is int and string list that I created, is also a list, right? So each of these are being identified by Python as a list. Okay, now what if I want to convert from one data type to the other, right? Let's see how we do it. So we have a equals 20 here. What if we want to convert from this a equals 20 is actually an integer, right? So a equals 20 is an integer, right? This is an integer. So what if I want to convert from an integer to a float, right? What if I want to convert from an integer to a float. What would I do? I just use the float function, right? Remember, I created a variable a which contains an integer 20. So if I use the float function on a, I'll be able to convert this 20 from integer to float. Now you can see that a decimal has been added to it, 0.0, right? So Python will now recognize it as a float. So we've changed the data type of this. And moving on, you're going to need this, right? You're going to, some of the data set that will come to your presence, you actually need to convert them from one data type to the appropriate data type that you need. All right, so you actually need to take note of this as we progress in the course. Okay, now let's move on and see this one. Now we have a float here, right? We have a float here. Can we change from a float to int? Remember, we changed from int to float. Can we also change from a float to an int? Let's do that and then see. Now you see that what happens here is that the decimal point that was at the back, which was making it a float, has been stripped off. Now we have only 200. Right, we have only 200 over here. So we can change from a float to also an integer. Now, can we change from an integer to a string? That's interesting, right? Let's try and see. Now you see what happens. If we use str on a contains an integer, right? So we want to change from an integer to a string. So this is what happens over here. Right, this is what happens over here. It's add a quote to it. This is a single quote, which means that Python will recognize this number, which earlier on was an integer, as a string now. Okay, now we have this c variable which contains this string total data science, right? We have this string variable which contains this variable which contains this string total data science, right? Now can we change from a string to an integer? Let's see what we get here. We get an error, right? Invalid literal for int with base 10 total data science, right? We cannot change from, what is basically saying that we cannot change from a string to an integer, right? We cannot do that. Okay, so we take note of that we cannot change from a string to an integer. All right, now don't forget a is actually 20, right? A is 20 over here, right? It's an integer. And then we have b to be 200.345, right? 200.345. Now if we add everything, we will get this. If we check the data type of d, right, this is going to give us a float, right? Just like we saw earlier on, it's going to give us a float. Now we can also create a list of a list. Remember that what we're doing earlier on over here, we created a list. We used the square bracket, right? We used the square bracket. Then we created our list items inside there. So, and also here, right, square bracket here, just one square bracket. Then we have a list of items that we want inside here. Okay, now we can also create a list which contains other lists, right? That's a list of a list that we're talking about here. So over here you can see that we're creating a list, right? That's the square bracket that you can see, which is outside here, right? Which is outside here. So this is actually the main one that we have over here, right? Then after that, we can also see that we also have lists, another list that have been created inside, right? We have another list that have been created inside. So this is what we refer to as a list of a list. Okay, so you can also create a list which contains other lists. All right, now if we do that, we see that this output has been output for us, right? So which contains a list of a list. Now we can actually use the index of this list to actually perform a slice or index, and then get an output of whatever we want. So what will happen over here if we do this is that Python is actually going to recognize this. It's actually going to index this, right? So in Python, if we are counting the index, right, we start from 0, 1, and then 2. So this list is at index 0, this list is at index 1, this list is at index 2. Okay, so if we use list of list, remember that our variable that contains that is named as a list of list, right? So if we use list of list at index 0, what is present at index 0 is this. So it's going to output this for us, right? So let me just do this and then show you this. You see what we have over here. You see that at index 0 we have this, right, which is the same thing that we were able to output. Now if we see list of list at index 2, right, so remember I said this is 0, 1, and then 2. So at index 2 is this, which is the same thing that we have over here. Okay, so we can use the index to actually get the output. Okay, Now let's see how we can actually work on this. I mean, considering this indexing and then slicing, right? Considering this indexing and then slicing. So let's see this image that we have here. Let's consider this. So consider this as a list, right? So let me open this one so that I can show you over here. So you see that I have this list that I've created, TDS, which contains a list of T, O, T, A, L. So all these are just strings, right? All these are strings that you can find inside here, right? It's just one list which contains several strings, right? Strings of total data signs. Okay, it's the same thing that you can see on the image, right? It's the same thing that you can see on the image here. Now let's consider the image. Let's consider the image over here. Let me use this. Let's consider the image over here. Now this is how Python actually indexes, just like I showed you earlier on. So the first item or the first letter is going to be indexed with 0, right? And then the second one with 1, and then 2. So it starts with 0. That's what you actually need to know. It starts with 0, not 1. Okay. So if you want to get any item from this, then if you want to say get the first item, then you need to know that the first item is actually at index 0. Okay. So that's what is happening here. So it will index it all the way to the last one, right? All the way to the last one. Now, this is what we refer to as the positive indexing, right? Well, this is what we refer to as the positive indexing. Now, Python also gives you the flexibility to actually count from the back. Now, if you want to count from the back, then the first item is actually -1. Right? So if you are counting from forward, right, like you can see the arrow as the arrow is going forward like that. The first item is actually indexed as 0, right? But if you're counting it from the back, then the first item is known as, the last item is indexed as -1. All right, so if you want to get the last item, you can either use -1 or you can use 15. So either of this will give you this E. Either of this will help you to output this E, right, to get access to this E. Okay, so let's see how we can actually manipulate this data, this list that we created over here. Okay, now if we create it like this, you can see that we have this list that have been created for us. If you use the print function, it is actually going to help you to get this. Okay, now you see that it's just the same thing that we have over here, right? You have your list, right, which contains total data signs, right? Now let's see how we can perform the slicing. Now if we do this, right, if we do TDS at index 0, what is at index 0? T, right? So at index 0 is T. So that's what it's going to give us. You see the results that we have here. We have T. Right, so that's actually what is going to happen. If we do index -1, index -1, it does mean that you're using the negative indexing, right? So it's going to actually give us this -1, right? Which is the value there is E, right? If you want to use this too, you can consider that, right? So at -1, we have E there, right? So it's supposed to actually give us E. So the output is actually E, all right? In the same way, if you use 15 here, right? If we use 15 here, right, it's supposed to give us the same thing. You see that it's supposed to give us the same thing. So if we use 15, it means that we're using the positive indexing. If we use -1, we are using the negative indexing. They are all going to give you the same output. All right. Now, let's see at index 9, what is there, right? At index 9 and index -7, what is there? Right, so at index 9, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is X, right? And then at index -7, so -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7, so it's 6 S, right? So all of them is supposed to give us S, right? So if you run this, you see that we have SS. So this this one, right? Let me bring this one up. You see that this will actually give us, this will give us S, and then this one will also give us S, right? Because they are all pointing to the same location in memory, right? So they are all pointing to the same location in memory. So if you see the what we have over here, right, at index 7, this at index 7, right, that's the positive index, right? And then if you take the negative index, right, it's at index, oh sorry, we are talking about this, right, at index 9, right, that is a positive index, and then at index 7, right, that is a negative index. They are all pointing to the same thing in memory. They are all pointing to the same thing in memory. So if you use either negative or the positive indexing, you can actually output the same output as we're able to do over here. All right, as we're able to do over here. Okay, so let's move on. Now we can also slice in a range, right? So what we are going to do over here is that in a range, starting from 5, between 5 and then 9, right? At index 5 and then 9, extract everything that is there, right? Slice everything there and then output it, right? So if we see at index 5, right? Let's do this. Now what we need to note over here is that when we are saying that when we are giving this condition at index 5 and then 9, right, what Python is going to do is actually going to consider 5 at index 5, at index 6, at index 7, at index 8, at index, it will not actually consider index 9, right? Index 9 will not be considered, right? So it will consider it from index 5 to index 8. All right, it will consider it from index 5 to index 8. If you want the index 9 to be included, then you need to go one more, right? So that it will consider it up to index 9. So the last one that you give will not come. It will start from the first to one less, right, of the last index that you give, right? So it will extract from whatever is stored at index 6, whatever is stored at index 5, whatever is stored at index 6, and whatever is stored at index 5 and index 8. Okay, so at index 5 we have D, so it's going to output D for us, right? We will get D. At index 6 we have A, so it's going to add A. At index 7 we have T, so it's going to put us T. At index 8 we have A, so it's going to give us A. So this is what is actually going to give us an output. Okay, so let's go down and then see what we got when we did that. You see that we have data, right? We have data. That's what's actually extracted for us. So that is this, right? That is this. Okay, that's what it's actually giving us, right? So remember what you see here is just what I've put on a graphical form for you to actually get to understand it. So we can actually do it in a range, right? You can actually do it in a range as you can see over here. Now let's see how we can actually perform some splitting over here, right? Let's see how we can perform some splitting. So in some of the data that will come in, you actually need to split. You need to split some strings into individual strings, right? And this split function is going to be quite handy when you get to know how to use it. Okay, so let's see an example of how it is being used, so that when we encounter it in our subsequent classes, we will actually know how to use it. Okay, now I have this variable, right? Let me output it so that you can actually get to understand it. I have this variable that I've created, which is name. Name contains someone's name, which is Chris Arthur Johnson, right? That's the name of the person, Chris Arthur Johnson. Now, what I want to do is that I want to split it, right? I want to split this in individual names, right? Now, I want to split it based on a condition that if I encounter any empty space, that's why you don't have anything here, right? That's why you don't see anything here. Maybe if this one, if there was maybe something like that, right? Sorry, I think my pen is just misbehaving here. Okay, let me do this and then bring it back. Okay, so if we're having say comma in between them, then I will say that I want to split it based on comma. So anytime it encounters comma, it will split it, right? Now in this case, if you see the name that we have, right? If you see the name that we have, it is actually not having anything in between. It's just Chris space Arthur space then Johnson, right? So I want to split it based on the space. That's why you don't have anything in here. That's why I'm giving just single quote with nothing inside, right? So if you see what is happening here, Chris has been stripped, right? It has been split based on the individual names that we have. So Chris standing on its own as a string, Arthur standing on its own as a string, Johnson standing on its own as a string, right? So that's what the split function will help us to do. If you see this senior data scientist at Microsoft, right? Now, in this case too, you see that they are being separated with a space, right? With a space. So I want to split it on the space, right? I want to split it on the space. That's why I open the bracket and then I put double quote with nothing inside, right? I put double quote with nothing inside in there. Okay, all right. So now you can see that senior has been split, which is standing on its own as a string, data standing on its own as a string, scientist standing on its own as a string, at standing on its own as a string, and then Microsoft standing on its own as a string. All right, so that's what actually the split function is going to help us to actually do. Okay, now let's see this one. We have total and then we have data science. Let me modify this. Now if you do this, right, actually it's going to do the same thing for you. You're going to split it based on the space, right? So let me say that maybe this one is being separated with comma, right? Then I'll put comma here. Okay, now if I do this, I'll put comma here. Now if I do that, right, now we see that it's now separating based on the comma, right? It's now separating based on the comma. So if you have depending on how your data is actually being separated, right, that's how you're going to put inside over here. All right, so if it is space, you just leave it as a space. If it is separated with comma, you use the comma sign, all right, so that you can actually split it based on the comma. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on and then see over here. Now I have this list which contains names, right? List of all these, right? Let's see what we have here. Now let's say I want to count how many times Chris is being encountered, right? So if you have a huge data set, right? If you have a huge data set, this one is just a small data set, so I can easily go through and then see that Chris appeared here 1, another 1, 2, so and then 3. So 3 times, right? Chris appeared 3 times in this data set. But if we have a data set like 5,000 records, right? 5,000 records, it's actually difficult to go through all of them and see how many times a particular name appeared, right? So maybe you want to figure out how many times a particular ID duplicated in your data, or how many times a particular name has been duplicated in your data. So if you want to count how many times it's appeared, you can use the count function, right? You can use the count function to do that. Okay, so if we do that, right, if we use the count function over here, right, you can see that 3 times it's output 3 times, just like we were able to count that we have 1, we have 2, and then we have 3 over here, right? We have 3 over here, so we're able to count it manually because it's just a small data that we are dealing with, right? But if it's big, then the count function is actually going to be very helpful. Okay, now let's see. Let's say we want to see the index, right? That's to find the index at which the first John is encountered, right? So if you see over here, first John is encountered at index 0, right? So if you want to see at which index that the first John was encountered, right? If we do that, you can see that at index 0, that's where the first John was encountered. So we can do the same thing for, say, Chris, right? Chris appeared several times. So at which index did Chris appeared, right? For the first time, right? If we do that, I need to actually run this first. Okay, then I'll come here and run it again. Now I see that at index 1, right? So don't forget that Python actually indexes as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to the last one, right? So at index 1, that's where Chris was first encountered. So that's why the output is giving you 1 over here. Okay. Now let's move on and then see. Now this list is actually starting from John all the way to Chris. We can reverse it for it to start with, say, Chris, right? For Chris to actually start, so we can reverse everything that we have, right? So just in case you don't want to use the negative indexing to maybe see the last item that you have in here, right? You can actually reverse your list and then you can easily see the last item that is there. So if you use the reverse function, you can see that now instead of starting from John to Chris, now we're starting from Chris to John. Okay, now everything has been reversed for us. Okay, so we can use the reverse function in that order. Now we've created this, so let's consider this as the names of students in a class, right? Let's consider this as name of students in a class. Let's say now we have a new student. We have a new student that has been admitted into the class, right? Now we need to add the person's name to the class list. How do we do that? We can just use the append function to do that. Okay, so our new student is called Pallavi, right? So we need to add this Pallavi into our list that we've created over here, right? Which contains names of the students in the class. Okay, now if we use the append function over here, what happens is that it's going to add Pallavi to the last, to the last index, right? It's going to append Pallavi to the last index over here for us. Okay, that's what's going to happen. We can also use the remove function to remove a student from the list that we have. Maybe she has changed her mind, she don't want to continue with the class again. So we can remove the name from our list, right? Just using the remove function, we can do that. Okay. Now if we run the remove function, you see that the name is not there again, unlike it was here, right? Now it's not there again. The last one is now John, right? The last one is now John over here. We can also, using the remove, is just remove it without telling us how it did it or whatever. But if we use the pop, it will actually pop whatever that we want to pop. So if you don't put anything in the pop here, right, it's going to pop out the last item that you have in your list, right? It's going to pop out the last item that you have in your list. Okay, if you don't use any item, if you want to specify which
it's
which
7 o'clock.
If you want to specify which item that you want to pop, you can also specify that. But if you don't specify, then it's going to actually pop out the last item that you have in your list, and it's going to show you what it popped. That's what it has removed, right? It's also working like remove, but it will actually show you what it removed. Okay, we can also use sort, right? If you use sort on our names, right, we can also use sort so that it will sort the items of the list that we have over here for us, right? We can use sort to do that. Now, what we can do, let me just print this one again, so that we know what we are dealing with. All right. Okay, now you see that since we use sort, right? Since we use sort, it's actually sorting them in alphabetical order. So we have A, C, C, J, and then M, M, and then S. You see that how it is sorting them, right? So if you use the sort function, it can actually sort your data. Okay, now let's say you load your data set, right? You have a data set, you load it from your system, you're working on it in Jupyter Notebook or in Google Colabs, right? You don't want to actually mess up with the original data that you have. Okay, so in that case, you can create a copy, right? You can create a copy of the original. So let's say this is the original names that we have. We want to add new students, but maybe those students, just like Pallavi did, the person got admitted. The person later said, I'm changing my mind. I don't want to get admitted again. I'm changing my school. We need to go and remove the name from our original list. Now, maybe Pallavi is coming. We don't want to add Pallavi's name to our original list. We can create a copy, then add the new students list to the copy that we've created, right? So that our original data will still stay intact. Okay, so if you load your data set, right, into your environment and you're working on it, if you don't want to mess up with the original data, you can create a copy using the copy function, right? And then store it in another variable so that the original one will stay intact. Then you can actually mess up with the new one that you've created, right? You can work on it as long as you want, right? So that if you are satisfied, then you start working on the original data. Okay, original data set that you have. All right, no, so this is actually a copy of our names, that our list of names that we have. So now new names is containing the same thing, right? It's containing the same thing. It's containing the same thing. Just that if we do anything here, if we do any operation on these new names, it's not going to affect the original list that we were having earlier on. Okay, let's talk about this range function here, right? If we use this range, right, what it's actually doing is that it's considering a range which is between 0 and then all the way to 10, right? Considering a range from 0 to 10, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But don't forget, Python will not actually go all the way to 10, to go to 9, right? Because it's starting from 0, so it's giving you 10 items, right? So range of 0 to 10. It's actually going to give you 10 items, right? Which 10 is not included. So 0, 1 all the way to 9 is actually 10 items. All right, so that's what range will do. So it will give you 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Which is 10 items. So if you want to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that's the range that you will be having. So if you use the range, you can specify this, or you can just use it like that, and then you can still get to the same range, right? So if you see over here, I'm using range 0 and then 10, right? So I can also use it like that, and Python will automatically assume that I'm starting from 0 to 10. All right, to generate 10 numbers. 10 range over here, a range of numbers. Now if you see over here, I have for value in range this, right? For value in range 0 to 10, right? So what I'm saying is that if I have an item, if I have items here, if I have let me do this. Let me show you the output here so that I can actually work on that alongside so that you can see. Okay, so now I have these items, right? I have these items. I have this range which is 0 to 9, right? So it will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. Now what is happening is that for value in range, what this statement is actually saying is that for any value here, right? For any value here in this range, so consider value as 1, as 0, as 1, as 2. So for any value here, print that value for me, right? So as soon as it encounters 0, it prints 0. As soon as it encounters 1, it will print 1. As soon as it encounters 2, it will print 2. As soon as it encounters 3, it will print 3. As soon as it encounters 4, right? So it will do the same thing for all the values that it's actually encountering here. So for any value, right? That's what the statement is actually saying, that for any value in this range, right? Print those values for me, right? Print those values for me. That's what it's saying over here. For value in range 0 to 10, print those values for me. That's what it's actually this statement is actually showing us. Okay, now if I do this, right? So now earlier on I do for value in range 0 and then 10, I did not add anything here. I can add another thing here. See that I'm adding 2 here, right? I'm adding 2 here. So value is just over here. Value is just a variable name that I use. So you can choose over here. I can use maybe for n in this range, right? Print n. So it's just a way to just represent the items that are in this range, right? So it's not specifically that you should use value. You can use anything. So if I do this, I'll still get the same answer. If I use maybe just a name, just maybe something like this, right? Print the same thing for me, right? So for this is just the representation of showing what is inside there. You see that I have the same output. Okay, just a representation. You can change it. So over here you see that I'm just using I. So for I in this range. Now what is different here is that instead of just range 0 and then 10, what I'm adding here, right? Let me output this so that I can work alongside for you to see. What I'm output here is that for any value which is in this range, right? In this range, right? Which is normal circumstance is supposed to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? 8, 9, right? Something like this, right? So that's the range. Now I'm giving another condition here, which is 2. I'm giving another condition here too. What I'm saying is that jump 2, right? So from 0, right? 0, it will go to 2, right? That is 1, 2, right? So it will go to 2. Then it jump again, 1, 2, so it will go to 4. Then 1, 2, it will go to 6, right? 1, 2, it will go to 8. So this is what I want to print out, right? For any value which is in this jump, I mean, output that. That's why you see here, you see this 0, you see 2, you see 6, 4. Sorry, you see 4, and then you see 6, right? You see 6, then you see 8 over here. Okay, so that's what's going to happen over here. So instead of 2, right? Instead of 2, maybe I could have used since let me even change the range. Maybe I can change it all the way to 20. Then I can use maybe say let me use 3. All right, so if I run that, now you can see in jumps of 3, right? So from 0 to 3, from 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 12, 15, right? So it's something like that. Okay, you can think of it as a multiples of 3. Okay, that's what is actually happening here. So you can give a condition like that. All right, I just have a simple code here which I want you to just go through, just like I did over here. All right, so if you get the Jupyter notebook which I'll load on the platform, you can go through that. Okay, now let's talk about this. Let's talk about this one. All right, before we go to list comprehension, let's talk about this. Let me give the output here so that we can work alongside. Okay, now what is happening over here, right? What is happening over here? Remember that we created we learned how to create a list. So if I want to create a list, say name it, store it and say n, right? Then in that list I want to create maybe I'll give numbers like 2, 3, 6, 7, maybe 14, right? Maybe 14, something like that, maybe 19, right? Remember we learned how to create a list like this, right? Now over here what I'm doing is that I'm creating an empty list, right? A list with nothing inside. That's what I'm doing over here. I'm creating a list with nothing inside. Now, what I'm saying is that for x in range 8, right? So remember that earlier on I talked about range 10, right? Which is nothing but equal to range 0 to 10, right? That's what Python understands. So range 8 is nothing but range. If we take range 8, it's just the same as range 0 to 8, right? It's nothing but the same thing. Okay, what I'm saying is that if for any item which is in that range, so in range 0 to 8 is actually going to give us 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? That's 8 items. That's 8 items. If you pick any item here, right, square it. So if you take 0, square it. So if you can see over here, square it, and then if you square it, append, right? I'm using the append function. Append means that add it in this empty list. I have an empty list here, so if I square it out, so I pick for instance I pick 0, I square it, and then I put it inside. I pick 2, I square it, and then I put it inside. I pick 2, I square it, then I put it inside. I pick 3, I square it, then I put it inside. I pick 4, I square it all the way to the last one, 7. I square it, then I put it inside, right? So that's what this append function is actually doing. So it's going to pick any item which is in this range, right? So for any item which is in this range, it will actually square it, then it will put it in this empty set that I created. So if I print that, you can see that 0 square is actually 0. 1 square. Okay, let me actually do this again because it's not actually matching what I did. Let me run it again. Okay, now we have it correctly because I ran it earlier on. That's what you can see. The numbers were not. Okay, now let's see what we have over here. Now you can see 0 square is going to give you 0. If you have 1 square, right? 1 square is 1, right? If we have 2 square, 2 square is actually 4, right? If we have 3 square, 3 square is nothing but 9. If we have 4 square, 4 square is nothing but 16, right? 5 square is 25. 6 square, right, 36, and then 7 square will give you 49. So it will square everything, then it will put all of these, right? It will put all of these in the empty list that we created, right? It will put everything in the empty list that we created. So that's what is actually happening over here. Okay, let's talk about something we call list comprehension. Right, let's talk about something we call list comprehension. Now, if we go to the deep learning part, right, for those who upgrade from the machine learning part to the deep learning part, you will encounter how to make your code as simple as possible so that it can actually run, right, as efficient as possible, right? Making your code simple, whether it's deep learning or computer vision or machine learning or what, is actually advisable. It's a good practice. Okay, now previously we've been using this these loops, right, for loops. Now we can actually avoid that using what is called list comprehension. Let's see how we're going to do that. So we talk about this, something like this, just like we were dealing with right now, just like we're doing here. So I'm creating an empty list here, right? Then I'm saying that for any item which is in this range, right? So in this case, I'm keeping a jump of 5, or you can think of it as a multiples of 5, okay? That's what I'm actually doing here. I'll square every number, right? Then I'll append it, meaning that I'll add everything in this empty list. Okay, now if I do that, you see what I have, right? So I pick 2, I square it, I have this 4, right? I pick I mean, let me give the list so that I can actually see, right? So let me run this. I think I need to run it like that. Okay, now in this range, right, you're going to have we're going to have 2, we're going to have we are going to have 7, right? So then that is in jumps of 5, right? In jumps of 5. So 2 plus 5 will give you 7, 7 plus 5 will give you 12, right? So you're going to do that all the way till you get to to the last, which is less. It's not actually going to get to the 50th part, right? It's not going to get to the 50th part. So that's what it's going to do in jumps of 5, right? In jumps of 5. So 2 plus 5, and then 7 plus 5 will give you that 12 plus 5, and then whatever number is there plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 to the last number that it will give you. So if you pick anything, right, like 2, it will square it, right? It will square it. and then it will add it to the empty list. So that's what you see here. 2 square, you see it as 4 here, and then 7 square, you see it as 49 here, right? And then 12 square, you see it as 144 here. Okay, now that's what is actually happening over here. Okay, now with this we use if you want to see the number of lines of code we have here, we have 1, 2, and then we have 3, and then 4, right? If we, like, we have 1, we have 2 here, we have 3 here, right? And then we have 4, right? Now let's see how we can do this. Now you see this, just a single line of code here. I'm doing the same thing. I'm giving this condition that whatever number that I pick, right, in this range, I score 8. Right, so for any number, that's what is happening here. For any x in this range, right, score 8 for me. That's what I'm doing here. So in this single line of code, I've been able to do whatever that I've been doing so far. Everything with these lines of code, right? So if you want to compare both of them, right? If you want to compare both of them, you can see that I have this. I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, and then I finally print the output. That's 4 lines of code. But if you see over here, I have only this. You see that I have only this line of code, and then I'm printing here. So you can see how I've been able to compress this, right? So this is more comprehensible, right? So that's what we refer to as list comprehension. It's more comprehensive. You see that I'm using a square bracket here, form of a list, but it's comprehensible, right? So it's more of list comprehension here, making it more comprehensible. Just shortening your code and making it run as fast as possible. All right. If you see the output, right? If you see the output, just the same thing, right? It's just the output is the same thing that we have here. So whatever output that we got when we run this for loop is the same output that we are getting over here, right? The same list of output that we are getting over here. Okay. Now, if you see this one, right? What I'm doing over here is that for any item which is in this range, which is 2, and then all the way to 100, right? For any item which is in this, this one is going to be like 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the last one, right? All the way to the last one, maybe 98 or 99, right? That is all the way to 99. If you pick any item and the item is divisible by 2, right? So that's the remainder is equal to 0. So this one is more like a modulo, right? So if you know a little bit of modulo, but if you don't know, it's not a problem. What is actually happening here is that if you pick any item which is in this range 2 all the way to 100, right? And the item, if you divide that item by 2 and you get the remainder of 0, then you output that number. So what is going to happen is that any item which is between this, all items that are divisible by 0 are actually even numbers, right? Because if you pick 3 divided by 2 will actually give you 1 remainder 1. So the remainder is not 0, so 3 will not be output here. But if you pick say 2 divided by 2 is actually 1 remainder 0, so 2 will be output. If you pick 3 divided by 2 is actually 1 remainder 1, so 3 will not come. If you pick 4 divided by 2 is actually 2 remainder 0, so 4 will come. If you pick say 5 divided by 2 will be 1 remainder, will be 2 remainder 1, right? So 5 will not come. Okay, so it will do the same thing. So actually what is going to happen is that it's going to print all even numbers for you. It's going to print all even numbers for you here. Okay, so you see that I did everything, all this operation was done just with a single line of code. Just with a single. So this one powerful thing about Python. So if you want to do this in Java or C or C++, just think about the lines of code that you will write, right? And even here, we are even trying to avoid these for loops and then make it as simple as possible. All right.